So, welcome everybody to this session. You are now in track 3, and my name is Michaela Vogel. I work at Solutions to Share as an event manager, and it's my pleasure to be the host for this track 3 for today. I will show you a few slides of mine to give you a short overview of what we're doing. Good. Let me go to the beginning. So, Tadeh, can you tell me whether you can see my screen
Yep,
well?
yep, I
But
can
it's
see your
not in the
screen very well.
presenting mode, right?
No, no.
No, let's go to the presentation mode. Yeah, let's go here. So also from my side, a warm welcome to our very first International Team Summit. So maybe you've visited or attended one of our German summits before, then you already know this format. If you are new, however, I want to send you a special welcome and I'm really happy to have you here at this event. It's all about Microsoft Teams. So I will be guiding you through this track, starting with the very first session now. The whole summit will take place from 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time until 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And for our European community, we will start at 6 p.m. or we have started at 6 p.m. and will continue until midnight. So grab your coffee or your caffeine drink of your choice and stay with us. Also, a short thank you from my side to our sponsors. So, for VIP sponsors, we have Solutions to Share, GBS, Amexus, and Martello. And from the community side, we also have support from Skybo, Teamsware, and Digital Touch. Please do not miss the chance to take the break and go to the sponsor booth and get to know our sponsors and the special offers that they present for this occasion. Um, as I mentioned, we are on 3 tracks and we are track 3 now. All the tracks will be held simultaneously, so you have to make a choice which track you want to attend. But you don't have to worry because all the sessions will be recorded by Airmeet and we will put them on YouTube later on. Also, please share engagement throughout the sessions because then you can win something. You can win a prize by being number 1 out of 10 on our leaderboard. So you can do this by setting up your profile or showing engagement throughout the sessions, asking questions, using emojis, maybe even raising your hand when you have a really important question that you want to bring to the table. So please do so and engage with us. Then we already had the first session with Alexander Eggers. At the lunchtime, we will have a meet and greet with our sponsors where they will have short presentations of their own. And now I want to introduce Tadeh Hovanessian, who is from Amexus, and he will be talking about a roadmap to implementing Microsoft Teams. And with that, I want to hand over to you. Am I still sharing my screen?
No, not anymore.
No, great, awesome. So thank you very much for joining us today, and the stage is now yours.
Thank you for that introduction, Michaela. Hello, everybody. My name is Tadeh Hovanessian. Thank you very much for taking the time today. Um, I will now share my screen. Okay. Um, as I said, thank you very much for joining. My presentation today is about a roadmap to implementing Microsoft Teams. My name is Tadeh Hovanessian, and I'm a Microsoft 365 consultant. My focus areas are the modern workplace, Microsoft 365 and Teams, and also SharePoint. Please feel free to add me on LinkedIn. There's a link there. I assume these you can find me with this link, and I will also share that in the chat later. Please feel free to start writing any questions you have, so that we can go through that at the end of the presentation. So What does a Teams implementation involve? Well, there are several factors, and the point of this presentation is to give you a broad overview of some of the most important factors that we need to or needs to be considered. And I've set it out here with these 5 broad areas. So starting off with the technical. Okay, so first and foremost, what's most important is to understand what the current landscape looks like. Have you currently do you use Microsoft Teams currently? And if so, how have you implemented it? There are that's obviously very important. Most of the time, it has been implemented for chat and conference facilities, but it does a lot more than that. So it's important to understand that firstly, what the reason is behind it, and obviously what you hope to achieve with Teams in the future. The second aspect is the Active Directory and the single sign-on. That's very important because depending on how your infrastructure is set up, you will. It's important to have a connection with Active Directory. There are many functions and features that are supported by having a connection with Active Directory. And so it's important to understand if that Active Directory is online, if you have a hybrid model, or if it's an on-premise. So that's quite important. And the same thing goes on as well for single sign-on. It's very important for the user experience that they can sign on to Teams without having to put their password in every time. The next one is Exchange solution or Exchange solution. Sorry. Is an Exchange solution implemented? And sort of the same aspects that I just mentioned for Active Directory. Is it an on-prem? Is it online? Or is there a hybrid solution in place? That's important to understand how we can optimize Teams if you have already implemented it, so that we can make sure that we use the features that you want to use with Teams. So that's very important. For example, calendar. If it's on an on-prem, you don't have access to calendars, so that can that means that you have to use Outlook, and then is the question: would that be better with an integration in Teams as well? But as I said, same with Active Directory, they work very closely together, Teams and Exchange. So there can be a huge influence on how Teams functions, and so that's the main reason, to make sure that everything is connecting the way that it should. The next very important point is our terminal servers, or VDIs. Now, it makes a huge difference what terminal servers you're using, but the common issue with them is that Teams doesn't perform well under terminal servers because they just don't have enough resources. So it's important to understand that if that's being used, that we look into what software you're using or what solution, and discuss what the best way is to move forward. Whether you want to enable Teams to be used locally, or have the ability for the users to use it locally, but also a terminal in case, or rather the other way around, if terminal is causing problems, that you have the local solution as well. The next point is telephony systems. Would users use Teams for contacting, or for as a telephony system, and contacting customers or external partners? That's obviously also quite an important thing to think about, not only for the practicality reasons, but also in terms of connecting to your existing telephony systems, if that's something that you would like, of course. So that's an important another factor that you need to look into. This is all, as I said, this is all just for the technical aspects. But yeah. Next one is compliance and security. There are many options in Microsoft 365 in relation to compliance and security. So it's important to take a look at how that's been set up, if at all. And obviously taking a look at what industry you're in, what the regulations or the rules are behind that. I assume that you would know what those are, at least to have a good idea. But that obviously needs to be translated into what you should do in the online world. Specifically, I'm talking about cloud solutions here. And to figure out if there are any holes that need to be filled in. That's the main point. Okay, so I've sort of with some symbols there included what I mean by compliance and security, but just to spell it out again, retention policies. That is important to understand what information you need to keep and that you can't just remove and delete for legal reasons or regulatory reasons. Data loss prevention to make sure that that you're not losing data accidentally, and that certain measures are in place to make sure that doesn't happen. And backups, for example, multi-factor authentication, and also conditional access, which will be based on location. So these are all things you can put in place to make sure that you're complying with the regulations, and also making sure that your security is up to scratch. Some other points are file storage, external access, and guest policies. It's important to understand how you're currently sharing files internally. Are you using a network drive? Do you already use a cloud drive, for example, or is there some sort of hybrid solution between that? How do you want to move forward with that? Do you want to use Teams primarily for sharing files? These are all very important questions because Teams is great for sharing files, because there is a SharePoint solution behind it. But if you're looking to save big files, then it's the question: are you looking to implement OneDrive, or do you want to continue using your network drives? And that's a very important question to answer, because it does open up different ways of users being able to share files with their colleagues, and also their potential customers and partners, of course. But also on that point, guest policies. How do you want guests to be able to interact with your teams? Do you want to have that feature where guests can a part of your can access a certain part of your team's environment? That's also very important to discuss, so that you can have a fluid communication with guests using Teams, rather than just sticking to old-fashioned email or telephone, or of course one of the other online conference systems that are also available. But with Teams, of course, the added benefit is that it's integrated into the Microsoft landscape. Yeah, so that is important. Next one is your Office version. What Office versions are you using? Because Office 365 does provide or does offer the best yeah, the best of both worlds in terms of having desktop Office systems, but also having the latest features that you can use with Teams. For example, you can see other people using or other people on the document and editing the document, and you can seamlessly share information with people on Teams. So that's a real big plus. For example, seamless synchronization, auto saving. But if for whatever reason you're not using 365, then it is important that you're at least using the same versions, because otherwise there can be issues with compatibility, of course, and connections with Teams and across users. And the last point is, or one of the last points is backup. Backup is very important because you don't want to rely on Microsoft, and I will explain more about that. I have a dedicated slide for that, but there are some limitations on what is backed up and how you can restore. So it's our or we'll say uh, my suggestion or recommendation that you make sure that you have a dedicated backup solution in place, and there are third-party tools for that. The next point is oops, what's happened there? Okay, the next point is equipment, which is quite obvious, of course, but just to mention it again, to make sure that you that the users have proper webcams or laptops and headsets. And obviously to make sure that they are in a quiet environment and that they can have productive conversations. And so, of course, you've all had an opportunity over the COVID period, obviously, to perhaps make some changes. But I just thought that might be something that I should just mention quite quickly. The last 2 points are admin training and a proof of concept. So it's important to make sure that the people in your organization that usually deal with IT aspects are well aware of what Teams can offer, and how it works, and what they need to be responsible for, so that they can support users as well. I guess that's relatively obvious. And as I said, lastly, proof of concept to make sure that if in case you haven't implemented Teams, that you have a pilot, perhaps pilot phase that you set up to make sure that your users, the focus group, for example, uses the Teams first before you release to the whole organization, and obviously for terminals in specifically, that the performance isn't a problem. So moving on to backup, as I mentioned, there are features that or functions that Microsoft have that you can bring back certain items that have been shared in SharePoint, for example, an Exchange up to 93 days. For mailboxes and groups, there are different time limits. So there are many different options. And in case you miss these time periods, then you can raise a ticket with Microsoft within 14 days of you sort of in terms of being late, essentially, or going over these time periods. But I don't recommend it because you can't just pick and choose. The whole website collection, in the case of SharePoint, will need to be restored, and backups happen every 12 hours. And even in that case, it will take a lot longer than you intended, and there's no guarantees. Microsoft does not guarantee that after that time period you can get your data back. So it's very strongly recommended that you use a third-party service. So okay, so that was where we already discussed. That's the technical implementation. So let's move on to the development process and lifecycle. What do I mean by that? So it's about the essentially the usage of Teams, both in terms of how you set it up, but also how you decide to use it. It's a living application. It's constantly improving, and improvements are being implemented. And it's important to understand how you want to work with Teams within your organization. How do you want to use it with your users? How does it work with your industry? These are all important questions. But in this specific question here, I'm relating to is how you want to create teams. So for each team's team is essentially a group. And within under the group, you have different channels. So it's important, first of all, to understand how you want to create, or for what teams you want to create new teams. It's a bit confusing with the name, but you soon get used to it. Should there be some should there be users have to fill in a form, for example, so that can be approved. You don't want to have anybody creating a team because that could cause confusion. What's the correct team, etc. So that's the reason why we have that, or the reason why we suggest that's put in place. But also, once it's been once that particular team has come to an end, for example, it could be that a team was created for a specific project. How is that dealt with? Is it archived? Is it just deleted? When is it considered that a teams will be is inactive? Is there someone that there should be someone who monitors that? A dedicated owner, for example, that takes responsibility for that. Because if it does need to be deleted, then obviously you need to make sure that someone has saved the data in a central location, just in case some information needs to be referred to in the future. And as I said, not just that, but also for regulatory reasons that you need to do that. What happens if the business owner leaves? Does the team get archived? Do you want to then? Will there be a second owner that will take their place? These are all very important questions that you need to consider. Some more sort of important points: a naming convention and templates. Do you decide? Do you want to use templates? These are some other factors that questions you need to answer. And lastly, there. What user groups do you want to set up so that different users have different privileges? So this is basically along the lines of guidelines and policies, so that users know what they can use Teams for and what they shouldn't use Teams for. So that's the general point there, and how to use Teams most effectively. Okay, the next point is procedures and responsibilities. This is the third aspect of an implementation. Who is allowed to create new teams? So this is sort of it's sort of on the same point of or the same area which I just mentioned with the rules, but now we're talking about who should be responsible for that, which I sort of slightly alluded to already. Who should be the owner? Is it based on business unit? Is it based on a project manager? It could be different for different purposes. So it may not necessarily be that you have to create rules for everything, but it's important at this stage when you're implementing just to ask these questions. Who should be responsibility for the data, as I said? How do you want to have external users use it? These are all in questions which I've already mentioned, but I thought it's very important to create a separate slide for that. Okay, next point is new work. This is now the fourth aspect of an implementation. What do I mean by new work? Well, that's the whole purpose of what Microsoft Teams is there for. It's supposed to be a hub which users can use to access all the different Microsoft products and services. You can use it to access SharePoint. You can use it to access tasks and Planner. So it's important to understand, since it's such an important centralized tool, how does it fit into your organization? Which tools do you currently use? How do you want Teams to fit into that? Do you want it to replace certain tools? These are all very important questions. Should you have teams which users can join? What I mean by that is that there's teams that are already created. You don't necessarily need to be invited to them, so the users can check out which teams might be useful for them or interesting. Do you want to have a team which will be used for news article sharing? That could be an interesting option as well. So you don't necessarily just put your information on your intranet, but you also use Teams for that. That could be another thing. How will daily work look like? How will colleagues interact with each other using Teams? It's much more than just a chat and collaboration tool. So, do you want them to be able to share files on Teams? And if so, how? So, some questions there about that. Okay, what's next? Adoption. This is the last point, and arguably I would say as important as the technical, if not more. And why do I say that? Well, implementing such a new tool makes it's a big change for users because it impacts so many different aspects. It impacts how you communicate with your colleagues, as I said, how you communicate with your partners and your customers, how you share information, how you access information. And I think for a lot of people, for a lot of users, at least that's my understanding, they don't appreciate how complicated perhaps Teams is, or what the meaning behind it is, or what it can do. Um, so it's important to sit down and ask these questions, because you will, in my opinion, you will, and this is based on my experience, you will or you should set up champion teams, teams who have the finger on the pulse, who understand how users currently work and how they will take to Teams, how they will use Teams, and of course, this is for a lot of companies uncharted territory. So it's important to have people who understand how users will approach Teams. Because if you don't have that buy-in from users, then it could be the best technical implementation in the world, but it won't be used, or it won't be effective. So um, it's 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 um, it's very important. And once a lot of people might be asking, how do you set up a champions team? Well, it's important to understand who might have a general sort of interest in IT aspects, and so perhaps those people who are out of their free will ask questions, for example, or have been involved in IT aspects in the past, rollout projects, for example, they could be good candidates, for example. IT, of course, is a good one, but you need to think about, as I said, people who are sort of closer to the general user because they will have the best understanding of how to implement Teams. But very important in addition to a champions team is a communication plan to make sure that users are informed quite early on that Teams is planned to be implemented, and how that will be used. And that would take many stages. So that's really important because if you don't start that early on and continue that throughout the process, and also after the implementation, it's important to continue that because what also happens is that once things are implemented, then perhaps communication drops off, and then users also then go back to or don't really adopt the application, or they go back to how they used to do things. So this champions team and the communication plan should go hand in hand, and that continues well after the implementation. And in fact, for the champions team, they, in my experience, shouldn't really, their job really doesn't end because um, your, just as your business doesn't end, in terms of, or what I mean by that is that your changes don't just end. Your business is constantly changing, and so should important tools like Teams also have the same approach. Um, it could be that your industry has changed the way it communicates with customers, for example, or your competitor has changed how it does things, and you then think, well, that's actually a good idea. We should also do the same. So, some small changes. It could also be the case, but it can make a big difference to how internal users as well as external users communicate and work, and that can make a big difference. Um, so that's in a nutshell what I mean by adoption. It's a very important point, and I think a lot of times in the projects, these are the adoption aspect is neglected, and that has a big impact on how the application is actually taken. And most of the time, if the adoption isn't there, um, then the application doesn't really take off, to be honest. Or if it does, it's only half-hearted, and that the full potential of the application isn't realized. Okay, so that was the 5 aspects. So that's that. Um, and the last point I want to mention is the usage policy, and that is essentially. Oh, sorry, I went a bit fast there. That is essentially sort of summarizes all the 5 areas. It's important to understand how that fits into your other policies, in terms of data protection, in terms of HR, essentially, or other aspects. So this is what the usage policy does. It summarizes everything in one large document, which will sort of go through what the rules are, who's responsible, who would be the champions, the processes behind how the new teams will be created, and how it would be archived or removed, what data needs to be saved or backed up, and how the team's application will continue to be improved, and this feedback lifecycle, which I'll mention in a minute. So on that basis, I will show you the roadmap, and this is just, as I said, as an example, but it summarizes, I think, quite well what I've mentioned with the 5 aspects of an implementation, and the usage policy. As I mentioned at the beginning, to understand what the current status is like in the company in terms of the IT landscape, but more specifically, if Teams has been implemented, how it currently looks like, and then to understand what are the requirements moving forward. What do you want from Teams? How do you want, as I said, to share files, to communicate with colleagues? How will it replace the existing tools that you have? Do you want to replace them, or do you want them to work together? And if so, how? Part of that is obviously to make sure that what your requirements are fit with your current infrastructure. What does the Exchange look like? Do you have Azure Active Directory, for example? Are you using terminal servers? These are all things I've already discussed, but as I said, it forms a full picture of what your if your current requirements match what your technical equipment can support. The champions team should be involved quite early on to understand, or to help you understand, um, how users currently work, and how they should be informed about this change, and what needs to be done to make sure that users support what your plans are. That obviously means that you need to set up job descriptions, and so that the champions team understand what their responsibilities are. You also need to set up some sort of application and selection process. How do you want to select your champions? As I mentioned, um, you may have had previous project rollouts where users were involved. That could be a start, for example, but you could also have some sort of program where you send an email out to employees, and ask them who would be interested in such a role. And then once you've selected them, to train them, to help them achieve their role as a champion. And that could come naturally to some, but not to everybody. So that's also an important point. Um, once that's all done, then it's important to understand, okay, how does that fit into the usage policy? How do you want users to work with Teams? What sort of information can they save in Teams? What can't they save in Teams? Are there any rules behind that? How should a new Teams be created? Who should be responsible for Teams? Should there be different permissions based on different roles? And the last point is the adoption point, which, as I said, goes hand in hand with the champions team to make sure that the champions team and the usage policy are synchronized. That's very important, because if that's not synchronized, then that will lead to misunderstandings. And also, as I said, that the implementation won't be done so optimally. And the last point is, or one of the second to last point, sorry, is the integration to Teams. That's when you can then take the usage policy and the communication policy and put that into actionable well, actions, to understand. Okay, well, users need to be trained. They need to understand what the rules are, what should be done and how it should be done, and how they can use Teams in their daily work. So that's what the integration part is about. And lastly, once you've then integrated it and users start using it, it's important to continue that training, because that still forms part of the integration. I mean, even though you've integrated it technically and also with the support of the champions, it there is the integration continues, and that's important to understand, because the they've just started to use this application. It will take time until they fully integrate Teams within their daily work. And that's very important, because you want to get that feedback. You want the champions team to continuously understand from users how they're using it, what problems they're having, and this really comes out once you've just implemented it. So and once you get that feedback, you will continuously improve how you use Teams. So that will be a continuous development process. And that's very important to understand. I think a lot of companies just implement it and they think it's there, users can use it, it works, that's it. Unfortunately, it's not so easy as that. This is a very big change that hasn't been seen for a long time. Probably, yeah. I mean, it's a huge change. So I hope that has given you a very high level understanding of how to implement Teams. Obviously, this can be transferred to other projects, but here I try to make it sort of tailored to Teams. And I hope you understand or have a better understanding now about what I mean by adoption and change, because that will be the key to make sure that that the application that you're implementing, in this case Teams, is actually used to its full potential.
Thank you, Tadeh. I
Mhm.
hope I'm not interrupting you, but it sounded to me like
Uh,
you
um,
have completed your presentation.
yes, I'm done.
Thank
Yeah,
you very much. It was a really comprehensive overview of the topic of implementing teams. And I think you've covered really a lot of aspects that are very important when using teams, when implementing teams, how to improve the process of implementing teams. And I have seen that we have one question. I would put the
okay.
question on stage so that you can answer it.
Oh, great.
So here comes the question. Do you
Do
usually
you
see
see
adoption as the
adoption?
responsibility of the project team as a whole or a single individual?
That's a good question. I think that it's not just it's definitely the project team. I don't think any one individual can make really a difference. So it definitely is a project team. But I would say it's actually broader than that. It's actually the organization. But of course, the project team is responsible for the adoption and to make sure that the organization has the tools that it needs to make sure that the adoption is done properly, and that really also needs to come from the management. That is the key because they are the decision makers. So if they
Mm.
aren't supporting it, then that won't really be achieved.
So, if I may rephrase that, would you then recommend every company to have a project team just for adoption?
That is that's what I would recommend. Yes, and I think
Mm.
that's what the champions team is responsible for, so that they communicate with the implementation team,
Hmm.
because they will be involved in the long run, to make sure that um, that the users the feedback cycle is there, and
Hmm.
that the organization knows where the pain points are, and so that they can make sure that's constantly changed and improved, and that doesn't happen when you just integrate an application.
Mm. We just got another question. I'll put it on stage again.
Mhm.
Can I get a print version of Roderick's screen in this presentation?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So I
Or
think you
is
already
that okay?
sent me your presentation. Is that
That's
right?
that's correct. Yeah. So
Okay, so then I can answer this question actually,
okay.
because I will be sending out those presentations, I think, until the end of this week. So all the presentations will be shared via as a PDF via email. So check your spam folders.
Okay.
And then we have another question. Now people are getting warmed up with the questions. We
Yeah.
implemented Teams, but it is not being utilized in the best manner. Where can I best learn the details of what will work for us?
Yeah, very good question. This is comes down to how you're currently using it, how your organization works. How do you communicate with each other? How do you share files? These are all. It's really a question of having a 360-degree view of how your organization works, and also then understanding what are your requirements. How do you what do you see as being a more optimally optimal usage of Teams? How do you want your sort of new work to look like? So
Mhm.
these are all important. These are all sort of questions that, unfortunately, I can't. There is no right answer. It
Mm.
depends on your requirements.
So, as I understand it, it would be beneficial to first clarify those requirements that you have for Teams. And I think the way the question is phrased, um, yeah, Tammy wrote that it's not being utilized in the best manner, and that to me sounds like you already have an idea what the best manner should look like. So, what is missing, basically, and maybe start from there, I would guess.
Exactly, exactly. That's what I would also say. But also, apart from that, um, I think it's important to that's why we're here, because
Hmm.
um, exactly what is best mannered to you, and was your understanding of it? Because we've seen Teams being implemented and other applications being implemented in many different organizations. So we have a much sort of broader understanding of what other
Hmm.
possibilities are out there as well, which you may not have considered. So um, I would say it would be it would be also a good idea
Hmm.
to get a rounded a round table with different colleagues to better understand what that actually means.
I think that's a very practical suggestion to get into roundtable and really talk about. So what do people need in teams? So maybe what is missing or what is not working, or were there expectations unmet maybe from the tool?
Exactly.
I think that could be very valuable actually and very practical.
Mhm.
So is there maybe one kind of common mistake that you've seen more often than others, or some feature being ignored that is actually very useful?
Uh, I think the one that sticks out to me the most is training that users don't fully appreciate what teams can do.
Hmm.
They may have used it for since the corona situation started, and they've just used it primarily for chat and conference. And when I give training and they see what teams, how complicated teams actually is, they're just overwhelmed.
Mm,
And you don't necessarily um, understand that just by using it as a chat and conference facility. So that would be I think the main point I would say, and that comes down to adoption, which I already mentioned, training and adoption, and making sure that the users really have been consulted, understand and support fully what the strategy behind the team's implementation is.
I see. So I'm seeing that we have one person raising his hand. Would that be okay with you if I bring Daniel König on stage? We have, I think, a few more minutes.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, sure.
All right, then I'll hand him the mic.
Hello,
Welcome on stage, Daniel.
thank you very much. I have a question.
Hello.
It's quite long, to be honest, so it didn't fit into the query. So my situation is the following: that we are currently providing a concept for in implementing Microsoft Teams, and well, we have certain steps already established, but people in high positions in my company already make us not go along the concept. So providing a separate way for them, they are in very powerful positions. So we more or less have to find a way around this whole situation to provide them the needed freedom they need, the needed space, the needed any kind of objective they have. And so I'm thinking of making a separate way for them, like a custom way for special needs, and which is going a parallel way to the regular guided way for the regular user. So I wanted to know if you have any input for me, if this is a way maybe you've guided people already, or if I, well, should quit this whole process more or less.
Okay. So, thank you for your question. So, if I understand correctly, you mean that the management isn't supporting
Well,
the.
partially they are, and most likely they want a guided process. But as they have special needs, special requirements, and wield a lot of power, they they won't. They want a process which is not going 100% accurate to our concept.
Aha. Okay. Now I better understand. Um, well, in that case, I wouldn't recommend that you go around that because from because as I mentioned, adoption is a very important aspect, and it could be that you get around at the first stage or the second stage, but if you don't work with management, then that will cause problems along the line of the project later on. So I think in your shoes, I would get management together with the project team to understand what their requirements are, what is the reason for that, and to reach a good agreement, and to reach an agreement which everybody is happy with, because that's the key, and that will help everybody to understand what we're doing here, why we're doing it, what do we want the future to look like, and so that will make sure that when it comes to adoption, that management supports you with the right resources, um, and that you give the project a fighting chance to succeed properly, or to succeed, yeah, um, as I said, if you may think that you've won the battle, but I think that you may not win the war.
Okay.
So that's what I would say.
Okay. Well, thank you for this answer. To be honest, I'm not very sure if there can be this kind of agreement for a win-win situation, because as I've noticed, there are many special cases for them. So I think I need to find some kind of way to integrate them in the concept. Maybe, as you already said, for a win-win situation, but I think in the long run it's going to be tough.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing. Well, I know this is a simple or a very cliched argument, but nothing worthwhile is ever easy.
Definitely.
But as I said, you will succeed to a certain extent. But I think that the management are the ones who, as far as I understand, I mean, they are the ones who make the decisions, and so they can make life harder in the future.
But I think it's always probably beneficial to show that you are looking for a win-win situation, because that's something everybody, I think, would like to have or would like to achieve. And even if it's just a step-by-step approach, there can still be improvement, I think.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
So I wish you the best of luck
Thank you.
with your project, and that it goes well. And if it's okay with you, I would then conclude the session now.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank you very
for
much, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you very much also for your question and for all of your questions and for your engagement. Don't forget that you can collect points on our leaderboard for engaging in these sessions, asking questions. And this is also a win-win, because you can win something and we can have more interesting session actually for everybody when you engage with questions, and our speakers have the chance to really help you with your problems, and they can also benefit from that. So thank you all for submitting your questions, and thank you, Tadeh, for answering them. And again, for your presentation, it will be shared together with the others, I think, towards the end of this week. And that concludes this session. I will see you again in just a couple of minutes, in about 7 minutes, with our next sessions, which will be about the topic of shifts in Microsoft Teams. And with that, I say see you. Sorry, what am I interrupting you?
No, sorry. Could I just say one last thing?
Yes, of course
Okay,
you can.
great. I won't be long. I've just popped my LinkedIn profile in the group, so please feel free to connect with me. I will also be waiting in the lounge. Not sorry, on our stand. Sorry, at our stand. So please feel free to come and say hi. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you for staying by. So if you have more questions, go to the booth area of our sponsors, the sponsor area, and there at the Amexus booth, you will find Tadeh, and you can continue the conversation with him. So thank you for this offer, and I'll see you all soon again.
Thank you very much. Have a
Bye.
good day. Bye bye.